Welcome to Oceanside Chat, Light Beyond Generations. I'm Helen Wang, the host and the creator of the program. Season 3 features entrepreneurs and thought leaders who drive research and development of the future. In the past 5 episodes, our speakers span from university to industry, from workspace to outer space, from venture capitalists to entrepreneurs, and from data science to space technology. Season 3 has been a fascinating journey for myself, my students, and our global audience through the Oceanside platform. Besides the motivating spirit to produce premium content, the most challenging task was to keep the secret about the finale guest, who I met at Google's leadership retreat in 2014. Our friendship began at the retreat dinner table in Calistoga and continued to grow through the project collaboration at Google X, and my business trip to Boston in 2017, which eventually led to today's interview. Because we came from different domain expertise areas, I always enjoy our conversation and appreciate the opportunity to satisfy my curiosity about robotics. So now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Marc Raibert, the Executive Director of AI Institute, the founder and chairman of the board at Boston Dynamics, and a truly iconic figure in robotics. Marc, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Helen. Thanks for having me.
The popularity of your ideas and creations is evidenced by the YouTube videos produced by Boston Dynamics, with millions of views per video. And the most popular one, Can You Give Me a Hand, has more than 152 million views. So Marc, in your opinion, what attracts people to your robots?
You know, that particular video shows us we're really like proud parents because we're interfering with the robot doing what it's doing, but it prevails by working around the disturbance. Really showing off its skills a little bit better than if it were just doing the task, you know, easily and quickly. I think people are excited by the idea that robots could become like animals or eventually even like people in how they move and, you know, someday in how they think.
Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about this someday. Hopefully that's in the near future. So in addition to your celebrity robots, you are also famous for wearing Hawaiian shirt, as we see on the screen. When did you start wearing them? How many do you have in your closet? And could you tell us the story behind them?
I don't know exactly when I started wearing them, but let's call it 15 years ago, something like that. Someone told me that she thought that they were out of fashion and I really shouldn't be wearing them. I just had one or two at the time and I was wearing one. And so I stopped wearing them for about a week. And then I thought, well, I'm not going to let her tell me what to wear. So every working day since, I've worn one. It's classified information, how many I have. It's an embarrassing number.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay. That speaks a lot. You know, the story itself speaks a lot about the character of yourself. And I also love the background on the screen. Could you tell us more about it? Where are you right now?
Yeah, right now I'm in the office of the AI Institute, which just opened up a couple of months ago. We're in downtown Cambridge. MIT is right over there. Draper Lab is there. Google has 2 buildings right here. And there's a bunch of biotech here. The Broad Institute, the Whitehead Institute are like a block or 2 away. So it's really the hotbed of R&D. And so it's the perfect place for my new operation.
Wow. So you're in the center of an innovation hub.
Yeah, exactly. Kendall Square.
Wow, that's impressive. I hope to be able to, visit you in the near future.
I look forward to it.
Who were the most influential people in your life and why?
Well, you know, I probably have to start with my parents because my father, who was a frustrated engineer, he was an accountant, but he told his mother, who was from the old country, from Russia, that he wanted to be an aeronautical engineer. And she thought that that meant he was going to be a grease monkey. And she didn't approve of that. So he became an accountant. But our basement was always filled with tools and equipment, electronics, and he was always building something. So I would hang around, mostly just watching him. And then when he wasn't there, I would be, cooking up my own contraption. So he was a big influence. The next professional influence was Ivan Sutherland, who I met when just after graduate school. And I talked to him about some robotic ideas I had, and he picked one of them to give me a little bit of funding for, and it helped me get started.
Yeah. So you founded Boston Dynamics 30 years ago in 1992, when you were a professor at MIT. So congratulations and a happy 30 years birthday to Boston Dynamics. Your story has inspired the entire robotic industry and beyond. For example, I don't have an engineering background, but I fell in love with the idea of a friendly robot who can open the door for me when needed and even dance with me. So what inspired you to found the company to begin with?
So, I had been a professor for about 15 years, first at Carnegie Mellon, then at MIT, 9 years at MIT. And, I loved that time, but I started thinking about what it would be like to make some of the work we were doing into products. And I was actually inspired when we took our MIT robots out to Hollywood to make the movie Rising Sun. This is a Wesley Snipes, Sean Connery movie. And we were just doing one scene where a scientist who was sort of portraying me, I mean, they didn't think of it that way, but that's how I think of it. And we had our robots running around, and it was so hard to take the robots out of the lab and get them to work. This was the first time we'd ever tried to take these robots that work great in the lab and take them out into the real world. And, that got us thinking about what it would take to take things to the next level. We didn't go directly to robotics at the next level. It took us a few years to get there, but that's what one of the things that inspired the start of the company.
That's such an interesting story. I also thinking the origin story, that how you started, it has a lot to say about, the fun part of the company, right? The entertainment, like dancing part of your robot.
It took us a while to let the fun-loving part really show through. We only started doing dancing 3 years ago. So I was the chairman, but not CEO anymore. And I kind of had an opportunity to, to do something a little different. To be honest, in most of my career, I concentrated on the functionality of robots. And I still believe the most important thing about a robot are the functionalities. What is that? Mobility, the ability to move around. Dexterity, the ability to use your hands or other devices to move objects around. Perception, the ability to look around in the world and understand what's being perceived. And things like that. Those are the core. And dancing, where you're just showing off or communicating by moving around in a interesting way, that doesn't really fit with the practical uses of robots. But it sure is a lot of fun. And it's a different side of the machines. And it took, a different kind of work in order to get the robots to be interesting to watch.
So we probably, as a human, take for granted, right? We move every part of our body, seems so easy. And I think dancing the part of the robot, I mean, does that show off the capabilities that sort of, well understood by the robotics, but maybe not an average, people out there, but it's fun for them to watch as well.
Yeah, it not only shows it off, it really tests it. So when we made the robots do some of the dance moves, it was really torture for the hardware. And we had to make some changes to the hardware in order to accommodate a wider range of behavior. Dancers are athletes, and athletes are athletes. And making the robots into athletes is a challenge that, expands the horizon. Also, all the controls to make them do some of the maneuvers that are in dancing, increase the boundary of capability. Those are sort of the side products. But I have to say, those aren't the real reasons we did it, even though we got the benefit of that. The real reason was to have fun and to look at the robots in a fun way.
I'm curious about the rhythm, right? Because when you move, there are certain, I mean, do you come up with the music first, the rhythm first, then you program the robot to it? Or actually robot just dance according to the rhythm? Like, what's the chicken and egg question here?
Well, Helen, you're asking a great question. And I think there's two answers. From the very first legged robot that my group has been involved with, going back to really JPL and then Caltech and then Carnegie Mellon University, we were interested in the fact that animals and people have springs in their legs. And when they do things like walking and running, they're really bouncing on those springs. So there's a rhythm or a harmonic motion in normal locomotion for people. And that's carried through how our robots work, which is a little different than how the robots before us work. But to do the dancing, we usually started with the music and then took advantage of the fact that the robots could do a bouncy motion. You know, the dance to Do You Love Me, which was the biggest production we've done so far. When I was 12 years old is when that music came out. And when I was 13, I actually had a dance partner and we were dancing to that song. And we were doing the mashed potatoes. I don't know if you know if you listen to the song, they say, do the twist, do the mashed potatoes. And they go through a whole little medley of dancing. And, I lived that as in the 60s when I was a kid. And so it was fun to go back and repeat with that same music and, make the robots do it. And it wasn't easy. To understand technically what a mashed potatoes is as a dance took a group of us a lot of work before we had a thing that we thought was a passable implementation of it.
Well, this is fascinating. Thanks for sharing the behind the scenes story. It's just so fun to know about it. If you have a time machine to go back 30 years ago, would you do it again?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been great. I love being an engineer. I can give you my engineering pitch, but engineers are the luckiest people. They get to not only use science, but also be creative. Scientists only officially get to describe what's already out there, but engineers get to make new things using science. So one thing is you get to be creative. Another thing is you get the actual satisfaction from building things with your own hands, at least if that's what you're doing, or writing software, whatever it is that you're making. And so you sort of get paid for your work those 2 times. And then the third time is they actually give you money to do your work. So what could be better than that?
So this is a perfect pitch for engineering. Thanks for that. So last 30 years have been some of the most rapid technological advancement in human history. Just to name a few inventions, the world's first web browser in 1993, a Google search in 1997, Facebook in 2004, iPhone in 2007, and Bitcoin in 2009, and self-driving cars in 2012. There's a long list of invention happened. 30 years is also a long time for a venture. According to Statista report, in 2020, the average lifespan of a company on S&P's 500 index was just over 21 years. So Mark, from a founder's point of view, what are the significant milestones and pivots of Boston Dynamics in the last 30 years?
So first of all, people ask me about the company. And the first thing I like to point out is I don't think we're like any other company. In fact, it's also true that probably no 2 companies are like each other when you get down and look at, the details. But I think the fact that I'm not really an entrepreneur at heart has to do with our 30 years, because we we kind of wandered, not knowing what we were doing for many of those early years, trying a little of this and trying a little of that. One milestone was when we had a project where we were building a surgical simulator, which was something that you could feel the organs, even though they were simulated organs, and you could see them and you could do tasks in order to teach someone how to do some simple surgical operations. We scored the people. And we realized, and we took this simulator that people really loved to a couple of medical trade shows. And we realized that we didn't have the skills or the resources or the marketing talent to make a go of it. And we killed the project. Even though we loved the technology, we killed the project. And we never looked back. It was just such a great decision that was not going to succeed for us. And it wasn't too long after that that we started doing the kind of robotics that has defined the company. First, working with Sony. We secretly worked with Sony for several years. And then we started doing our own, BigDog, which was sort of BigDog was definitely a milestone because we went full force back into building hardware and combining it with software to make it do new things. I think the next milestone was when BigDog got good enough that all of a sudden we could see that you could actually have a robot in the world doing things. Before that, we were just researchers who were kicking the can down the road, saying, what's an improvement we can do over what we had before? What can we do that our colleagues or friends will admire in our work? But the idea that we were building a thing that could eventually be useful wasn't really part of our thinking. We were just trying to, move ahead a little bit. But then there was a point where I call it light at the end of the tunnel, where there were enough pieces working in place where you could see all we have to do is this, this, and this. And this thing could be, would pull together and there would be at least some tasks that you could actually use it for. I guess the next big one was when we sold the company to Google, and then from Google to SoftBank, we started to become more commercial. Up till then, we were really an R&D company, but both through the influence of Google and their interests and SoftBank and their interests, we started turning, we made the Spot robot, which there's about 1,000 of them around the world, and it's a platform that can be used as a product. And we started making a Stretch robot, which is for handling cases in warehouses, and that's ongoing work, and we have some other things in the works. So I think that was a significant turning point for the company and for me personally. I think that I discovered over the last few years that I really didn't want to be doing commercial work. I wanted to be the long-term researcher. And so it led to me starting the AI Institute, which is, what I'm working on now.
Mm-hmm. When was the BigDog established?
It started we wrote a proposal in 2003 to DARPA. In all of my academic years, I was funded by DARPA. Ivan helped, that guy I mentioned before, helped me get started with DARPA, and they funded me for many years. Then we stopped when the company started, and then the company started doing work with DARPA again. So starting with actually a project, the surgical simulator, and then BigDog, and then a whole sequence of projects after that. So we wrote a proposal in 2003, and we started work in 2004.
Mm. So what you just described is sort of a life cycle from a science research project to, practical application, and then eventually moving forward with commercialization. What a journey.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it took us from 2003, you could call it, well, sort of some very basic research before that when I was a professor. Then from 2003, you could call it 10 years until we had something that looked like it could be made into a product. And then we, productized, over the last few years. And we're continuing to, improve the reliability, build out applications for the robots, develop marketing team, sales and marketing teams, support, network, all that kind of stuff.
So you are an entrepreneur by evidence.
You know, me plus a big team of other people is I think the proper way to look at it.
Yeah. So what is the company DNA and culture that has lasted the company through difficult times and will keep the company resilient in the future?
Well, I have a set of things that I think are, I like to call the culture. I'm not sure that this was in our culture all that time, but it's the way I describe it now, both for Boston Dynamics and for the new thing. One thing I call is technical fearlessness. And what that means to me is being willing to take on a technical problem that you don't know how to solve, but one that you think is important and that you're willing to, you know, commit resources to, not only money, but your time and your talent and the talents of the people that you have available. I think that's an important thing. Another one I call diligence. Diligence means don't just try and do a tiny solution to the problem, but look at the problem from lots of directions and try and build a robust solution. You know, you at the very outset talked about the robot that was opening the door and we were disturbing it, but it kept working on opening the door. And it's very easy to program a robot to move its hand, grab the handle, pull the handle. But if you want to be able to deal with all the doors in a building, we had 98 different doors in that building that we were doing that testing in. And if you wanted to be able to do that, even if someone's pushing its hand away from the door handle and pulling on its, we had a rope attached to the robot. You know, to do all that requires a much fuller solution to the problem. And those kinds of full solutions are the ones that can really work in the world for robotics. So that's 2, diligence. 3 is intrepid. Intrepid means that things aren't always going to go right, but you got to keep pushing ahead. And I think that's really important. The truth is we love when the robot doesn't work right and it spazzes out or it breaks or it, you know, goes running, tipping down the hill and we have to go chasing after it. But being able to have that phase of the work and keep working on it is really important, I think, to have in a culture, and not to be afraid of things breaking and you having to fix them and things like that. And the 4th ingredient is having fun, having technical fun. And, you know, again, I already mentioned being an engineer, but I think part of the fun of being an engineer is that you get to work on things that are, you know, just technically enjoyable. And if you can have that, you know, you have a great life.
I want to go back to the fearless, the first one, you know, better understand that. I mean, how do you know, like, how do you know which problem to pick up? There's so many, right, technical problems out there waiting to be solved. So how do you decide which one is worthwhile for you to be fearlessly resolving it?
So in the past, before we were acquired by Google, a lot of the direction was applied by our customers. I like to think of it as though here's one vector, which is what we wanted to do. And we would find customers, some of them wanted to do what we wanted to do. Some of them wanted to do other things, but thought we could do it. You know, that's not a good situation. The best situation is alignment. And then our job was to find a set of customers where there was enough mutual direction in what they wanted and what we wanted so that you could make progress over the long term, not just in the contract, not just in one project, but over many projects. So I think that's the way we thought about it. You know, sometimes when things were a little rough, we would take a project that not only did this, but sometimes even, you know, set us back because we couldn't work on what we should be working on, we thought. In our current situation, at the Institute, where we're completely funded by Hyundai, and Hyundai is a great owner and partner in the work we're doing, we have a lot of freedom. And it's scary freedom. It really requires fearlessness because we have to pick a direction that's going to be the, you know, at least we can pick several directions, but some of them have to pan out. It's a little bit like being a venture capitalist. You don't just bet on one company, you pick a portfolio of companies. And that's what we're trying to do now, pick a portfolio of thrusts, not spread too thin, but with the right mix of risk and opportunity across the various things we're trying to do.
Yeah. So let's maybe pivot, talk a little bit about your most famous celebrity robots. For example, I'm familiar with BigDog, Spot, those are the legged robots, and Handle, which has a wheel, right? And then Atlas, which is a humanoid research platform. So first of all, who gave them all the names?
I did BigDog. I think Al Rizzi might have done Spot. Spot's from the children's storybook. So that's where that name came from. I don't know exactly who picked it, not me. Handle, Handle was designed to handle objects. So Handle was a derivative from an earlier version of Atlas. It has some of the form of a humanoid, but it's simplified. And we were trying to make it more practical so it could handle boxes.
Could you also walk us through the latest product family and their targeted applications?
Well, when I look at Spot, it's a robot that you can buy today. And as I said, there's about 1,000 of them out there. Some of them are used. There's about 100 universities that have them. There's a couple of high schools that have them. There's a lot of innovation labs at companies that use them. And then there's a core set of customers using them at factories, refineries, places where they need to do inspection to look at gauges, listen to machines to make sure it's working. And, it's kind of a tedious job to go around and do all the measurements that need to get done. And the idea is that by using Spot for that, there's a real commercial opportunity to scale up the uses. And we've been working on the reliability of the robots, and we have them now so that there's several hundred hours between interventions, and they're really practical for those kinds of applications. But I call that a today robot because we're selling it today. The stretch robot, which is one that handles boxes that are about this big, most of them are cardboard boxes. And most of the world's products get manufactured, they get shipped via a truck or a boat in a container, and then they get unloaded from the containers, they get resorted and put back on trucks or on containers, and then get shipped to retail stores. And almost all those handlings and there's about 500 billion boxes moved around the world every year. That's a big number. And almost all of it's done by human hands. And it's not always pleasant work. It's really backbreaking work where you're doing repetitive operations, box after box after box. So we designed Stretch, which is the derivative from Handle, which was a derivative from Atlas, to do this task. And we're selling it into people who have warehouses who are in the middle of that process. And we have a group of early adopters. So we don't have Stretch is still in a prototype form. We're going to have the first actual product next year, but we have them in trials in real working warehouses today as the prototype. So I call that the tomorrow product because next year sometime we'll actually be shipping it at reasonable scale. Now we're working with a handful, I think it's 6 or 8 visionary large companies who have a big warehouse need. And then there's Atlas, which is a research platform. We don't have any immediate commercialization plan, but it lets us cultivate new technology for controls, for design. And, I think there will emerge from it future products before long. The next time we do an interview or you do an interview with another Boston Dynamics person, they'll be ready to tell you what's next after Stretch.
Back to Spot, I remember we had this conversation about how big the Spot should be, how much weight it should be. So what is the perfect weight you picked?
The size of the current one was actually suggested by Larry Page when we were working at Google. We had a larger one that was about 125 pounds, and we demoed it for him and for others there. And at a meeting, he said, well, if it weighed more like 60 pounds, then you wouldn't be afraid to have it in your house. or work closer in an office or something like that. So we said, okay, and we did a precursor to the current commercial one that was about that size. I think it might be a little overweight now, but it's very close to that 60-pound scale. And there's some other people out there developing robots a little bit like Spot that are a little bit smaller. And I don't know if we'll do that or not. We, meaning Boston Dynamics, will do that or not, but it's possible.
So it really depends on, I guess, the environment and application that kind of determine the perfect size.
Yes, there was one other thing that influenced the size of Spot, and that is we wanted it to be able to reach onto a counter, like a kitchen counter, and be able to reach the back of it. So that meant it needed to be a certain height, and the arm had to be long enough to do that. If it weren't for that, we might have made it a little smaller.
So how would you summarize the key learnings from the past 30 years, Marc?
You know, I think it's really good to be intrepid and, you know, to keep going in your direction, no matter what the external situation is. You know, stick to what you love doing. That's obviously the biggest thing that not only applies to this, but maybe for other parts of life.
Such as the Hawaiian shirt fashion, right?
I think it works for me. Who knows?
So what's your vision for Boston Dynamics in the next 30 years?
Well, you know, I think Boston Dynamics is really in good hands. And that means a combination of Rob Plater, who's the CEO, whose goal is to really make it a commercial success, and in the hands of its owner, Hyundai, who has been just a fantastic support, both believing that future technology is important for them as a company. You know, you could look at them and say that they're a traditional car maker, even though the cars they're making now are getting more and more modern and futuristic and are doing, you know, very well in that regard. But their leadership, you know, starting at the top with their chairman and down, are real enthusiasts for future technology and bringing that in. And that's why they support both Boston Dynamics and the new institute that I'm working on. And so I think that's a great pair. Also, you know, a company like Hyundai that manufactures millions of cars a year is a great partner for a company like Boston Dynamics that's designing new technology that needs to get manufactured at lower cost and at scale. And I think there'll be a lot of symbiosis there.
What advice would you give the younger self 30 years ago?
I would say, stick with it. You're doing a good job. I don't think I knew that at the time, but that's what I think now. You know, keep going.
Any advice for like young engineer or future entrepreneurs?
You know, I would tell them what I said before, that well, this is more for engineers, that it's a great field, that they're lucky to be doing what they are, and they should if they're not relaxed and having fun, they should. Don't worry, and you know, do what they love doing. You know, entrepreneurs, I have a mixed attitude towards entrepreneurs. I think there's some who want to make a quick buck and don't really want, you know, it seems like some of them are flitting from one thing to another, and that doesn't inspire me very much. Of course, there's some who are, you know, very serious about what they're doing and very thoughtful and all that.
That leads perfect to sort of the next topic I would like to discuss with you. According to your LinkedIn profile, you studied electrical engineering at Northeastern University and then earned a PhD degree in philosophy in MIT. So electrical engineer was expected, but I'm curious about how philosophy related to robotics.
It's not philosophy, it was psychology.
It's a psychology, I see. Wow. Yeah. But how did that happen? And then, you know, related to the robotics, if anyway?
Well, even though that department at MIT, which we call Course 9, if you're an MIT person, you name the departments by number. That department had two parts. One part that was probably what you think of as psychology, which is, you know, how does the mind work? How do you use language and things like that? but part of it was neurophysiology and doing things like recording from the brain to figure out how eye movements worked, how you used your hands and arms, how you balanced yourself when you walk, because animals do all these things, people and animals do all these things. So it really wasn't any different than robotics. It was just looking at a system that already solved all the problems that we want to solve for robotics. So that really fits in perfectly. Now, partway through studying the physiology of animals and people, I took a turn at MIT as a graduate student and started working on robots, but I stayed in that department until I finished. And then when I went back as a professor, which was several years later, I went back to course 6, which is electrical engineering and computer science, which is a little more squarely focused on building, machines that have the same characteristics that people and animals have.
Mm-hmm.
So there wasn't as much of a crooked path as it might sound like.
Yeah, it's just I guess there's a good reasons behind what happened. Eventually, right, come together.
You asked about turning points. There was one other turning point. When I was studying neurophysiology and, recording from animals, I didn't really like it very much. And I took a course and I followed the professor back to the lab. And at his lab, there was a robot arm taken apart, lying on the table in about 1,000 pieces. And when I saw that, it was like I was in robotics from that day on. No, there was no turning back.
I see. Your story actually may give a lot of comfort for a lot of younger generation of students in the university, because I got a lot of questions. I'm sure most professors get those questions. What should I do in the future? They're smart, they're brilliant, they work hard, but it's just they need some direction, right, to move forward. What you just said, I think it's probably happened to most of us is, we wish that we knew, 30 years ago when we were in college, exactly what we wanted to do. But I guess curiosity led you to, where you are today.
Yeah, I think people should do what they really like doing and not let people tell them what they should do more than necessary. They should really do what they love doing if they can find a way, to succeed at it.
Yeah, I love that. I would also love to ask you a few questions to just better understand your approach to research, to development, and innovation. First of all, after working at a Google X and many moonshots projects, that takes a long time, right? I realized the challenge related to long-term R&D projects. People are passionate about working on complex problems to change the world and make an impact. But we had to cancel most of the projects for good reasons. For example, technical feasibility is not ready, economic viability does not look good, or we're ahead of time. So what is your view about short-term success versus long-term goals?
I love the phrase stepping stones to moonshots. Google is famous, Google X in particular is famous for talking about moonshots. But I think that you only get moonshots if you design things so that they're stepping stones, where for me, a stepping stone means, even if you're working on something that might take 10 years, a stepping stone is a 1 year or 18-month, a year and a half project where you're not hoping to get everything solved that you're working on, but you hope to make progress towards it, and getting part way really accelerates the longer project because you get partial feedback, so you can do course correction. You always learn from implementation, even if it's not the right one. So we like to think in terms of designing stepping stones where you have tangible results that are sort of put into enough of a realistic form so you get some sense of how it's going to work when you get into the larger world of application or testing. Sometimes you'll cheat on, cheating isn't necessarily a bad word. If you have 5 components that are needed to solve the problem, here's your problem, and there's all these different components. It's okay to have some of them very ragged, solutions, or you have a person doing the solution rather than automation, if you're talking about robots, so that you can develop some of them. And then, one stepping stone is to get these working. And then the next time through, you'll get these working, or you'll fix the things that weren't working before. So, there's incremental ways of making progress on non-incremental problems.
Yeah, I think what you said was the short-term tangible results or wins, right, are important to have a long-term, I guess, big impact.
Yeah, I mean, they're also important emotionally. It's hard to work on something where you don't get feedback and satisfaction for a very long time. So you want to find ways, to have fun all the time.
Yeah, that leads to my actually next question is, many people motivated by impact, right? So what's your philosophy related to, like, regarding to R&D project that may or may not apply to the real world? How do you measure success that way?
Well, this is relevant to the current endeavor because we don't plan to have products, maybe ever. And I think it's a strategic decision to reject commercialization, because commercialization pushes one to work on shorter term needs, like putting in the features that a particular customer needs so that you can get revenue from them, or working on reliability when you don't have the core functionality to where it needs to be. So our goal at the New Institute is to work on more fundamental problems that are harder, to get more bold solutions that'll take us to the next generation. And you can point to cases where this has paid off. I think Tesla, it took about 10 to 12 years to get from the Roadster, which wasn't really a commercial product. I don't know how many they sold, but to the Model S, which was the place where they had success. And they learned a lot during that period, and they refined things. And I would say that was an example of how you bring technology along. I think the time horizon for robotics and AI is even longer than that. And if you look at organizations like DARPA, who have, I think of it as keeping the ember alive. If you look back 30 years ago, or you could go 40 years with me, because I was doing university DARPA funded work on things a lot like the robots we're building now, but not mature at all. You couldn't do that with venture capitalists. You certainly couldn't do it with your own money. You had to have an outside way of keeping that going. And the government was interested in cultivating technology over the long haul, and that's a great thing for the United States and the world, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. So how do you motivate yourself during that long period of time, and also your people, right? Just keep going regardless what short-term outcomes might be.
Well, I think you make the short-term outcomes enjoyable, and either by, as I said, being an engineer, you get to have the fun of building stuff. You get to show off results. YouTube was a great invention for me personally. I think if we had taken my early work in robotics and just written scientific papers where you plotted data and maybe showed a photograph or two, it wouldn't have had anything like the impact of showing the robot stumbling around or not stumbling around when we were more successful, or whatever it was we were doing. And although we had video and film in the early days, YouTube sort of was a wave that we could catch, because you could very easily show thousands of people what you were doing. Mm-hmm. In the early days, when I was a student, we were taught to shun the media, that there was no upside to talking to the media about what you were doing. And as a professor, there's still some truth that you don't want to go overboard with the media. But once we had a company there was a time when I was trying to sell a project to a government group, and we'd been working on this group for probably close to a year with no progress. And then one of the program managers and his wife were at home watching National Geographic, and I was in some scene, showing off an early robot. And about 3 weeks later, I had a contract. And
Wow.
as a company, there's a great power of being seen on that platform.
Mhm.
And YouTube is a platform that makes it so you can do it without having to, get the media establishment involved in the process, which is a great tool.
Yeah, so YouTube give you the control over your message, your story,
Right.
right? Yeah, I see. What about the winning company strategy in the next 30 years? For example, there's a popular like platform versus product, the hardware versus software, and many other, combination could be. What are your thoughts?
You're asking the wrong guy. What I want to do is have a group that creates the technology that's going to enable the future products. And it's going to be up to the investors and the marketeers and the business people to harness that technology into products. But I think that if we didn't do what we want to do, which is to, make the technology, let me circle back. The key thing we want to do is make robots smarter, more like people. People, you can point at a task and say, see what that guy's doing over there? I want you to do what they're doing. And the person can perceive what they're seeing, translate it into a sequence of steps. They understand what the steps are, and then do it themselves. Now, they may have to learn a skill that they don't have. Sometimes they can figure it out just by watching. Sometimes they'll already have the skills. Robots are nothing like that today. You have to have a whole room of programmers programming the skill, programming the sequence, adjusting it to the environment, building perception so it can see the things going on. And I think there's a lot of ways that people are very smart in a way that we take for granted that we're trying to build for robots. And then once you have that, I think robots are going to be much more useful. There'll be a lot more products you can do with it, a lot more valuable, increase productivity, increase safety. It's going to be a great day, but there's some hurdles to overcome to get there.
Human capital and financial capital enable innovation. After Google and SoftBank, the Korean automobile giant Hyundai acquired Boston Dynamics at the end of 2020. Furthermore, the company announced a $400 million investment to launch Boston Dynamics AI Institute in August 2022. So, Marc, congratulations on your next big endeavor.
Thanks. I'm having a great time. We're hiring like mad. If any of you are engineers or robotics researchers out there, look us up and send us your resume.
Yeah, I'm sure people would love to work for this new AI Institute. I also love the website and logo design that incorporates your Hawaiian shirt signature pattern, which contrasts with most technology companies' color palette, for branding and logos. For example, deep blue, ocean blue was all very popular, for technology company. I'm curious about the considerations and decision process behind the scene. Could you tell us more about it? How did you decide the Hawaiian shirt being part of your, branding and logo?
The story is like how real things work. We wanted to do the announcement of the Institute about a month afterward, but there were some practical reasons why we needed to do a press release in about 3 days. So we called up our PR people and said, oh, we need a website by Friday. We need a logo. And the people, who had interacted with me made up the logo you saw. It was the first design. We didn't iterate it. And we threw it out there, and so far we're pretty happy with it. I'm not sure the branding will stay exactly like that forever, but we were lucky to get out of the gate with something that we seem to be happy with.
Yeah, I love it, and I hope you would keep it. Well, so what are the reasons behind the AI Institute? Let's say why AI and why now?
Well, I think that people take for granted how smart people are, and they think by watching robots that are physical, we show robots dancing, we show robots doing parkour, running over the blocks, balancing on the beam, and they assume that the robots are also smart. It looks like the expression, it looks like a duck, it smells like a duck, it is a duck. But in robotics, it's not that way. It looks like a person, it moves like a person, but does it have the brains of a person? No. Does it have the perception of a person? No. Does it have the morality of a person? No. And does it have the language of a person? No. And so to make them as useful as people, we need to supply those other things. So the theme of the new institute is to do the physical part of robots like we've done for years, but to add a cognitive part and to try and get not only intelligence, but the symbolic intelligence. So we're working on solving those parts of the AI problem that are tightly connected to the physicality, but are different than the physicality, and thereby making robots a lot more effective and useful and valuable.
Mm-hmm. As written on your AI Institute website, the Boston Dynamics AI Institute is focusing on solving the most important problems in robotics and artificial intelligence to achieve fundamental advances in the engineering and science of robotics. What are the most important problems in robotics, in your opinion?
I think the one thing that is the most elusive so far is building the bridge between the continuous description of things, like a path is a trajectory that you can describe as an equation, or you can describe a picture by a pattern of numbers. How do you get from that to the symbolic description, where it's not a pattern, the picture isn't a bunch of numbers, but it's, oh, that's a cup, or oh, that's a person. That cup is similar to that cup. And that symbolic world is a very powerful world, but getting back and forth between the two is still pretty elusive when you look at all the generality. I can tell you, I'm not even in the room with you. I don't even know what's in the room, but I could tell you, give you instructions that you could follow. Get up from, we won't do it, but I'll tell you, get up from your chair, go find another chair, orient it so it's facing your chair and go sit in it. And you could do that.
Mm-hmm.
And think of all the physical stuff that's going on. But I didn't give you any equations that describe that. I gave you the conceptual description, the director's description, and you can interpret that, translate it back into behavior. I think that's the level we need. And that's the most important thing we're focused on, not only for behavior, but also for reasoning about the things around you.
Mm-hmm. Would you categorize this still as a functionality of robots or emotion of the robots? What part of the intelligence?
Yeah, I would call it a functionality to be able to reason. People have been working on it for a long time. There is some progress, but I think a lot more is needed.
Mm-hmm. Will the future robotics align with your earlier vision of legged robots?
It's true that I've spent a long time working on legged robots, very narrowly. I want to branch out from that. I don't think, legs are a good thing, but there's all kinds of robots. You may have noticed that at Boston Dynamics, that the stretch robot doesn't have legs, it has wheels, and it has a more traditional but still interesting mobility system. And we'll do things here that, span the space of mobility more broadly than what I've done in the past.
Mm-hmm. What are the biggest opportunities and highest risk towards to the future?
Well, let me branch a little bit. I think I could give a technical answer, but I think another thing that we're going to try and do at the Institute is deal with some of the emotional things around robotics. There's a lot of people out there who say that they fear robots. If you look at our YouTube, the comments on our YouTube things, and some of them even broadly fear all technology. And my view is that technology offers great opportunities that humankind would be stupid to cast aside, even though there's also some risks. But I don't believe the risks are as negative as some people think. And there's certainly some people who are, on the fringe who are totally worried about what technology can do. So one of the things the Institute's going to do is start to have some conversations where I hope to get people from all sides talking to each other, exchanging ideas. One of the things we find is if you get in a room with some of our robots and operate them, you get, there's a deeper understanding, less fear. A lot of people love to pose for selfies with the robots, which I think is a kind of affection. And so I want to get that conversation started. I'm not an expert in any of the ethics or policy, but I think I would hate to see us thwarted by government policies that are too negative, or the public policies that are too negative about the field, but also not too positive.
This seems to be a perfect timing, having those conversations, because technology is probably a lot more ready, right, than the past 30 years. And then now, given AI's power, that seems to be a great combination. I'm going to quote another statement from your website, that we needed to make robots smarter, more agile, and dexterous, and generally easier to use, more like people. Once we do that, robots and other type of intelligent system will increase productivity, free people from dangerous work, care for disabled, and generally help people live a better life. Does your vision of the future world of human-robot coexistence include in-home use?
Yeah, I think that they will eventually make their way into homes. I think that as a commercial activity today, it's one of the toughest places, because you need utility and you need low cost. And getting both of those things in robots is still hard to do. I think it was last year or the year before, there were several robot company failures, situations where people were trying to just have a communication device that was a robot. And I think the problem was that it was still expensive, and it wasn't providing much utility beyond a laptop or a phone or something, which provides a lot of utility for the cost. So it's much easier to start in industrial uses where there's more money available because there's money making going on. There's more discipline because you can have rules in a factory about how people are going to interact with the robots. Whereas in a home, basically your children are there, your animals, your dogs and cats are there. In addition, maybe your elderly disabled parent is there who can't get around. So it's the most challenging environment. We'll get there, but it'll take a while.
If you have any educated guess, how long you think that's a while?
We talked about helping the disabled. I had an aunt who lived with me her last time, 6 months, and she'd had a stroke. I think she had 2 strokes actually. And we had 2 full-time staff, people who worked around the clock, helping her get in and out of bed, get in and out of the bathroom, get dressed. And I think that's the kind of situation where you could get a shoe in the door, where there's more money being spent, so you can have a more expensive robot doing an important task. And, my aunt didn't really want to have strangers helping her. She would probably, I'm guessing that she might have preferred having a machine helping her do those things. So I think that's the kind of application that'll be the first one. So it's not the every house, as common as a pet, but it's a place where the economy could make it happen.
We are facing a similar situation one way or the other. It's a matter of timing. What do you just explain? Even like when we get old, right? Like how do we want it to be taken? Do I want to burden my daughter, to be full-time taking
Exactly.
care of me?
In the United States, there's about 31 million people who spend about 20 hours or more a week taking care of someone like an elderly parent or some other kind of relative. And, that's a big burden on the whole system. And of course, I know, you're helping your loved ones, and that's a nice thing to do. But I'm not convinced that, that the loved ones want to be taken care of that way rather than other ways. So I think there's a real opportunity there. And
Yeah.
I hope we can help address it.
It seems to be a real demand, right? And
Mhm.
it's probably increasing because with the aging, and people getting more longevity. Definitely, I can definitely see that's a great opportunity. But
Mhm.
what would be the relationship between human and robots if that happens?
Well, you definitely need easier communication than we have now, right? You want that uh, person who's being helped to be able to be in charge of the robot and tell it what it wants it to do, and possibly to do that without a lot of technical skills on the user's point of view. So I think natural language will be important, but also having the robot smart enough to interpret in a safe way what it's being told to do. Because you can easily tell, if you just talk to a thing, you can easily tell it to do something that's not safe, or if the robot's not smart enough. So, coming up with the right balance, it's going to be a very interesting set of tasks.
Mhm. I've been looking to a lot about Boston Dynamics because of this upcoming interview. I mean, you really set a great high standard, for the industry. For example, you have an ethical principles are published on the Boston Dynamics website, right? Just to name a few, we are motivated by curiosity and respect for humans and animals. And then we prioritize human elements in human-robot relationships. And there's another one, we support the establishment of laws and regulations that promote safe and responsible use of robots. Will the new AI Institute share similar principles?
Yeah, I think so. Now, I want to say that, I wasn't a key force in designing that. We have a lot of people at Boston Dynamics, and I think we, worked over the course of a couple of years to come up with those statements. In addition to, the more, we have in our license agreement the requirement that no one weaponize the robots, and there's a lot of nuance there. If you look carefully at our agreements, they say that we are not against the police and the military, who sometimes need to use weapons, but we think that the robots we are building are not the right ones to use for that. You need specialized solutions. And one of the sources behind these statements is we think that there's some folks out there who are using kind of an everyday robot in those very complicated situations. And we're sort of objecting to that, but not necessarily that people like police and military shouldn't use the tools that are available to them. So I have two thoughts. One is, I think that for every technology, there's a whole spectrum of things that can be used for that range from something you'd call good and something you'd call bad, or different people. Some would call one thing good and other people would call a different thing good, which is another problem. And the goodness and the badness is not in the technology. They're independent of each other, in my opinion. And I don't think the technology should be blamed for the things you don't like, and probably not even given credit for the things you do like. Let's take cars. On the one hand, cars have been a huge boon to the economy of the world, to the freedom of people. I could say, more good things. And they also pollute and have been a source of pollution.
Mhm.
Is it car technology that's at fault? So one thought has to do with sort of the independence. Here's technology and here's good and bad, and I don't think we should combine them. The other thought is that as a technologist, I'm always afraid that policy will come too early and cut off the opportunities by making decisions, very early in the game. An example is that if you look at some of the rules for safety of robots, they say things like you have to have an on-off switch that entirely cuts the power to the robot. Now, if you have a robot that's like on wheels and moves slowly, it's okay to cut the power. The robot will just stand there. If you have a robot that's like a person that's balancing itself and you cut the power, the robot will crash into whatever's nearby. So you need more nuanced rules for some kinds of technology. And so I'm always afraid when policy is happening too early in the game. I'm sure there's people who are on the other side who doesn't want technology to get out ahead of the policy making. But as a technologist, I'm on that side of that topic.
So what would be the sort of a good balance to strike in your mind?
I think you need to have, constructive people openly talking about all sides of the topic. I think that's what's needed for these things, and not to jump to, a knee-jerk position.
What about in the future? Because we imagine a world that a human robot coexist, right? So the environment you just talk about, for example, in home, would that require like some new, like social science or some other part of the science being plugged into, the robot design by itself?
This is a topic that is important, but I probably know less about. I know we have one of the researchers here who's been telling me that we need to improve our HRI, human robot interaction aspect to our plan. And, they're working on coming up with some suggestions of how to do that. To be honest, I think I started at the greasy end of the robot, where we're trying to get the mechanism to move the way we need it to move. And we're working towards the cognitive, and then the question of how far to go to the emotional and interaction side is, a TBD.
That's great. Mark, what is the final thought or one thing that you'd like our audience to remember from this conversation?
I think that the idea that people should work on things that they love doing, and that for me, robotics is so much fun and satisfying that it's a great career, and I'm just happy to be doing what we're doing, and look forward to the next phase of it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Mark, when I first met you at Google, I couldn't possibly have imagined interviewing the founder of Boston Dynamics on my own program like 8 years later. Thank you so much for sharing your stories and ideas with us today. On behalf of Oceanside Perspective and our global audience, I wish you and your team at Boston Dynamics and the newly established AI Institute the best of luck with your new chapters ahead, and a very happy new year. I hope you enjoy this chat as well.
Helen, it's been great. I can remember when we first met at that dinner, and it's been great talking to you ever since. And I really admire the organization you have going there, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. Help support.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay.
Thanks, Mark.